we're making things, we're selling things, we're making money, and what else? Those company values are baked into job descriptions, interviews, performance reviews. My values and my company's values either match or
Oh, this is why I feel so off.
this conversation can begin with yourself at any age.
Andrea, lovely to have you on the podcast. I'm honestly so thrilled to have you
Me
on. I
too,
can't
me
believe this is
too.
happening. Give our listeners an introduction to yourself.
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, it's such an honor to meet you and a pleasure to be here with you. And I agree, it's so amazing in the world of that we live in that across the globe we can connect on such an important topic. So thank you for having me. My name is Andreea Niculescu. I'm coming to you from the upper left corner of the United States in Seattle, Washington, where I live with my wife, Leah, my dog, Baker, and as of 2 years ago, July 1st, our baby. Her name is Mercer. We are just living the good life up here. Just love Seattle, love the Pacific Northwest. Spend lots of time in nature. Of course, spend lots of time drinking coffee, drinking beer, eating good food, and just trying to contribute to goodness in the world as much as we can.
I love that. What's your coffee order normally?
Oh, my I'm an Americano girl all the way,
Yeah,
so just a couple of shots of espresso, some hot water, and then Oatly. Most recently, I've shifted from half and half to
nice.
uh to Oatly, yes.
I noticed Oatly on your company website. I guess that leads us nicely to the next question, which is explain to me what is one and three, the organization that you run.
You bet, you bet. So my background is in advertising and brand strategy, and after spending almost 20 years in both advertising agencies and then working directly for clients like Starbucks and an REI Co-op, which is an outdoor cooperative here in the US. My business partner and I decided to spin off on our own and have a little consulting practice that is called One and Three. And what we say is that we sit at the intersection of brand strategy, which is about helping companies and organizations sort out, what are their deepest core beliefs? What are they promising? Why do they exist? Who are they for? Who are they not for? How will they show up? So that's brand strategy. Creative strategy is the expression of that.
Mm.
So brand strategy intersects with creative strategy, but most importantly, social impact strategy. So as a company or as an organization, what is that responsibility that you have beyond the things you make, the things you sell, to help um, solve in your own way, one of the many social problems that, of course, are alive and well all over the world. So one and three is very much our core values are about interconnectedness. So what's happening to you is happening to me, and what's happening to me is happening to you. And so how do we keep that at the center of what we do? And then so interconnectedness is what is referenced by one. Um, we are all one. And then three references a summary of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which, based on a incredible author named John MacArthur, he boiled them up into three, kind of all of those 17, which is, a lot. Um, he boiled them up into three, and those are all of us must focus on recoupling economic progress with increases in living standards,
Mhm.
decoupling that progress from environmental degradation, and then ending marginalization so that nobody is left behind. And so when we work with clients, what we say is irrespective of whether you're a CEO or, an earlier in career, have an earlier in career role, or whether you're a company of one or a company of a million, all of us need to be thinking about these things. Otherwise, what are we doing? And so those are really rich conversations, and they've been incredible undertakings with organizations like Oatly and others.
That is fascinating, Andrea. It's so within itself, it's quite niche because brand strategy and creative strategy is quite a broad field. Now, the other thing that I think we're going to speak about a lot is your Live Your Values deck, which I've actually got here.
Oh, me too, me too.
Likewise, that. Um, but before we touch on that, clearly something has driven you to focus on social impact, which I know is one of the values that you do touch on in the deck. And um, what has caused you to niche down onto that itself? Because it seems very driven by impact on society and the ripple effect, and how you've even niched down the name of the company too.
Um, Thank you for asking. So I think that boils down to I've always, since I was, it's interesting when we think about our values, and I know we're going to talk about this more.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to look back, look in, irrespective of how old you are, it's very interesting to look in the rearview mirror of your life and kind of see threads
Mm.
that literally for me, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I literally see threads of your question literally when I was, 10 years old.
Yeah.
It has to do for me with a sense of just, I mean, the best way I can describe it is, I don't know, was I born with it? Was it nurtured in me by
Yeah.
either my family or society? But it's this sense of um, a, a core sense of fairness and justice. And I just, from a very young age, have been aware of, conscious of, driven by, interested in, like what is fair.
Mm.
And so social impact and having my career lead me here is about um, we, we of course live, at least in the US, in a capitalist society where, the economic system is what it is, but within it, there has to be kind of a, yin yang or a sense of responsibility or accountability to, okay, we're making things, we're selling things, we're making money, and what else?
Yeah.
And what is that sense of I truly do feel that business has a responsibility to do good
Mm.
while it's doing well financially. And so that that thread that I can like look in the rearview mirror and say, yeah, when I was 10 years old, I was like, wait a second, that thing over there isn't fair.
Yeah.
What can I do about it?
Yeah, and it's interesting how that can go two ways. I think if you see some form of injustice, you can either go down though, well, this is unfair, so I might as well take advantage of it. And if everyone is doing it, then I'm going to do it too, versus
Right.
what you're doing, which is I've seen the injustice and I'm going to call it out and try and make it better. And I think there's that very much a crossroad there, isn't it?
You're
That's
so
really
right.
cool. Yeah, that's something I've noticed
Yeah.
as the years go by. Now, the Live Your Values deck, something that I think connected us, and that I stumbled upon in December. I still can't believe this
Me
conversation is
too.
existing.
No, what I can't believe, and you've told me the story of your
Yeah.
father. I can't believe that truly, halfway around the world, that you stumbled. I mean, I love that we're sitting here talking, but I just my sense of disbelief is like, wow, the impact that it's having on a person, and then, more folks who are listening to this, that it's just mind blowing, truly.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, I saw it, I used it, and then within the next 24 hours, I had already bought it for someone else. So it's, I think, so impactful. But let's dive into it. What is the Live Your Values deck?
Sure. So a number of years ago, I won't give myself away, but let's say more than a dozen years ago, I was at a crossroads in my life where It was pointed out to me by a dear friend that it would be helpful for me to take a look at what my values were. And I didn't mention this earlier, but as an immigrant from Romania, who's um, who has English as my second language, I this is so weird to think about now, but then um, I did not realize that I knew companies had values because I worked at a company that talked about its corporate values all the time. But again, maybe because I was 10 years old when, I learned English, maybe because in my childhood, the concept of values in my language was not talked about, but I literally did not know that I, as an individual, had values. And what are even our values anyway? We can talk about that in a second. But I found myself at this crossroads, and a friend of mine said, "Have you ever taken a look at what your values are?" And I literally like pushed away from the table like this, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And because in my culture in Romania, mm, I use this as a metaphor, but for some folks it's literal. It's like culturally it's like, oh, you have a problem. Like, why don't you go out and plow the field? And that will take care of your problem. In other words, there's not a lot of like reflection, looking inward. And so, anyway, to make a long story short, this friend of mine shared a values exercise with me that was, everything that I had found before that when I was looking for some insight was either very theoretical, quite boring, long and tedious. So just, it didn't make me want to, do it. This exercise that she offered me was fun, quick, and when I finished it, I saw myself on my table in a way that I recognized myself, but was also quite illuminating. And at that moment, again, this was many years ago, but I was quite, I was like a mature, fully formed individual. At that time, I had this lightning bolt, like this kind of two-way lightning bolt. The first lightning bolt was, I cannot believe that this is not a thing that is out there as a tool for everyone to be in conversation in relationship with themselves. I can't believe that it's not a thing because literally it was like a PDF that I, cut up little pieces of paper. The second piece was I cannot believe that I am the second lightning bolt was I cannot believe that I am as old as I am and I'm just now having this conversation with myself. So the lightning bolt was, oh my God, younger folks have to begin this conversation, this relationship, this friendship with themselves, as I say now, um, ideally much, excuse me, much earlier in their life, so that, and then this comes back to like what are values, um, they're what matter most to us. They're what we say matters most to us. And so if you don't know them, for me, I'll use I language. If I didn't know them, and therefore at every Y in the road, as we're making a million choices and a million decisions in life, what was I making those decisions based on? They were just haphazard. And so no wonder that I was feeling like some sort of angst or some sort of the gears of my life were like because I wasn't clear on what my values were. So cut to, I decided that it would be, speaking of like, what's my responsibility in the world? I decided that, since a product like this didn't exist, that I would be the one to make it so. And so years later, I met an incredible artist who lives in Portland, Oregon, here in the US, named Lisa Congdon, and she was also a kind of a, relatively speaking, latecomer in her life to a conversation about values. And then when she had that conversation with herself, her life was completely revolutionized, and she began on the path that she's currently on, which is incredible and incredibly successful. Not just successful, because that's such a weird word, but she is living a life that
Mm.
is aligned with her values, as I feel that I am on a lifetime journey. It's not like flip a switch and then all of a sudden it's, ta-da. I'm on a lifetime journey to make friends with myself, using this tool is the best way that I can describe it. Wow, that was a really long answer to your short question.
Amazing. No, it's great. This is exactly what the long form of podcast is for. And
Okay,
essentially,
good.
the
Okay,
way
good.
it works is that there are, and I know that when we first spoke, you said there were like over 100, way more, but there essentially are 78, if I remember correctly, cards. And you've got 3 categories for people who haven't used it. So you've got the matters most to me, which is here. Then you've got matters some to me, and then you've got the doesn't matter to me so much. And you have to use these cards that you've provided, as well as the blank cards, in case someone wants to add a value that maybe isn't there, and categorize it into those 3 columns, and eventually get to the point where, for our listeners, so that update, that you have to do a top 10 in order, which is probably the hardest part of it. And I know from listening to your previous podcast with Lisa, you and I had the same trouble where most of our cards were in the this is super important to me because we have such strong belief systems, which is challenging. And it's an amazing practice. I think having to order it and then figure out which one's your top one makes you have such clarity, but also opens your eyes even wider to your day-to-day interactions and decisions, to the point you're like, oh, this is why I feel so off, because this number one priority that I have is not in alignment. So first and foremost, thank you for creating it, because I think honestly, I'm so glad that something like this in the world exists. And it's something that I think is very much needed. And I know we've discussed this previously about, is the modern day world more open to value system and those sort of things? And yes, I think we're more open about speaking about these things, but at the same time, with social media and the facade that comes with it, perhaps it's something that's needed a lot more, especially in our post-truth era. So thank you so much to the both of you for creating it. I'm just so glad that we get to share it on the podcast. Now, very simply, what are values? How would you define this?
Sure. I mean, in the very simplest of terms, for me and for this activity, values are simply, if only, they are simply and very complexly, the things that matter most to us,
Yeah.
that we use consciously or subconsciously to drive every single decision, choice that we make in our lives. So underlying literally everything we do is some demonstration of something that matters to us. And, our supposition is, wouldn't it be better, calmer, um, more flowy if we knew what those things were, so that, again, at this Y in the road, um, there's an intention. It's like, and the other thing that I like to point out is, um, the thing that I strive for is, if I say that, for example, self-respect is one of my top 3 values, okay? If I say that self-respect is one of my top 3 values, how can you tell? How can you tell through actions I take, decisions I make, what I surround myself with, how I speak, where I live? Literally, like, if that, then how can you tell? And more importantly, maybe most importantly, how can I tell?
Mm.
Right? So as I'm just surveying my my day-to-day existence, my baby's right over there. As I survey my day-to-day existence, how can I tell that self-respect is one of my top values
Yeah.
in my communications, in the folks that come across my path, and I decide to interact with them this way or that way, this way or that way? There's a demonstration of one of those top values. And conversely, when I act in a way that someone outside of me or I look at and think, wait a second, like I thought that Andrea's, you know, that that one of the things that matter most to Andrea was self-respect. I'm watching her over here act in this other way. That is this concept, the psychological concept called cognitive dissonance. It's like, wait, like these gears like are not, fitting. Um, and so that is how I define values.
Amazing. I love that. And you ran workshops with this step, which I would love to hear a little bit more about.
I
And
do.
yeah, and in your proposal, you do say when individuals know their values and work toward alignment, they live better lives personally and professionally. Now, because for me it's very visceral, so it's hard for me to define this. What is alignment to you?
Sure. Alignment is for me, alignment is simply where I've heard this definition of integrity in sadly the obituary of a friend's father, and this definition of integrity was being what you seem. So like, the way you come across, the way you seem to be, what if like you actually were, that way? Alignment for me is when I have identified and named the things that matter most to me, and then I act that way, I make decisions that way, I make choices that way, then that literally begins to drive. And again, it's not a finish line. It's not like values alignment Olympics or something. Um, it's simply when you begin, again, step number one is, and just like it was for me, step number one is knowing, like beginning that conversation with yourself. Then once you know and you begin to make choices this way, not that way, this way, not that way, that what that begins to add up to is a life that, I mean, the shortest way I can say it is it makes sense. It's like your outside reflects your inside. Um, and when that happens, um, and I know we'll talk about work in just a second, but in our lives, because we live in the society we live in, we will spend maybe more hours in our work and with our workmates doing our work than we'll even spend, with our families. And so wouldn't it be great to have those things be to fit, in other words?
Yeah, I love that. And this is the thing that I have been pondering on since I've been doing this exercise. Um, so I guess I'm going to take full advantage of you being here and ask you this question directly.
Ooh, I
You
hope
know,
I can live
how
up to it.
no, how do you navigate a situation? Let's say you've figured out your top 10 values, right? And it completely, like one of, let's say, the top three completely contradicts someone in your circle that is very close to you, but everything else is perfect. How do we navigate that? Is it possible to navigate it? And if so, how do you even go about creating some form of harmony?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's probably one of the hardest, it's one of the hardest things to navigate, either personally or professionally.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, this question can run the gamut from as simple as a conversation to all the way to a decision that perhaps this relationship, this connection, this engagement may not be serving you. Um, and so it is, I mean, for me, values alignment are what my business partner Laura has deemed like the root of the root of the root of the root. When I don't have values alignment, it's kind of a non-negotiable for me. I don't mean that I just like, pull the plug on something. I
Yeah.
mean that I work on something, but at a certain point, it's, to be honest, the most ultimate demonstration of values alignment or not alignment, which is to say, what are you willing to forego in order to stay true to what you know matters most to you?
Yes.
So in my life, since getting quite clear on what my top values are, um, I have had really hard conversations with both people in my personal life and then have made really hard decisions in my professional life. Um, I've had those conversations all the way to I have to distance myself from the situation, and that
Yeah.
is really hard. Um, but but what I know is that I'm being true to who I am and what I know matters most to me. And doors are always open in terms of,
Yeah.
circling back if something changes. But I would say like I truly consider our values to be that root of the root of the root. And so how can it not drive really hard conversation if something is not in alignment?
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I think something else that I've noticed, Andrea, is that even without doing this exercise, some people just do unless they're in pure cognitive dissonance, they do demonstrate their values through the things that they do. And if it does contradict yours completely, then you're not in alignment for them either.
That's right.
Whether it's professional or personal, and actually having that distance allows them to meet people within their value system and likewise. But I guess that's the question that I guess we'll talk about in terms of work and diversity and inclusion. But before we do, I know we glossed over your workshop, and I do want to highlight the work that you do because it is so important. Tell me a little bit more about these workshops and what they achieve.
Sure, sure. So thank you so much for this part of the conversation. Once the deck and developing the deck, writing the deck, illustrating the deck, um, our publisher producing the deck, like let's call it birthing it,
Yeah.
took at least it took over 2 years. Once it was out in the world, and it began to make its way, all the way to your side of the world. Um, Laura and I had this realization. This realization was informed by the many, many, many years that she and I both spent within organizations, corporations. What we experienced in those many, many years is that companies, brands, organizations spend untold sums of money talking to their employees about the company's values. Okay. There's trainings, there's workshops, there's development. Those company values are baked into job descriptions, they're baked into interviews. They're baked into performance reviews. They're baked into training and development. They really, when a company does this right, they really do kind of are pervasive across every employee touch point, and that is amazing. And the way it should be. The realization that we had was too often the actual humans that make up those companies too often, because there haven't been culturally, in the US at least, we haven't done a good job. I mean, maybe we're getting a little bit better in the last few years, but we have not done a good job in the US about culturally having values conversations. I did a little bit of research into how different places, different cultures around the globe talk about values, and I learned as an example that in Japan, um, totally age appropriately, but in Japan, they begin talking about values in nursery school. Okay, so like when kids are literally 4 or 5 years old, they begin to talk about like what matters most. These things that you and I are talking about right now. Um, in the US, we're not that culturally attuned, and so these employees too often have not had those conversations with themselves about what matters most to them and how that's driving decision making. And so
Mm.
the realization we had was, hold on a second. as an employee of a company, how can I possibly begin to make sense of my company's values if I haven't made sense of my own values?
Yeah.
And most importantly, if I haven't thought through and talked through the middle of that Venn diagram, right? So, like where my values and my company's values either match or it either are a close match or are a little bit like further apart, but there's still some common ground. Or if they're like very far apart, then it's like this is not the right place for me. I'm not the right person for it. Maybe we're both kind of in disalignment, and wouldn't there be, a better spot for me? So these workshops are about introducing in a super what I want to just highlight is in these workshops, nobody is put on the spot to talk about their own personal values. The conversation is simply about, what are values? What are they important? Why are they important? Um, Doing the exercise privately to go, to sort out your own values, pun intended, and then we regroup and we talk about how the process went, what was hard, what was easy, what was surprising, what was reaffirming, what else came up. And then there's a part about this like intersection of my own values with my company's values, and what does that look like? The coolest thing, really, either personally or professionally, about the reason why this deck is called Live Your Values deck, not Know Your Values, um, is because on the back of each card are questions to ask, actions to take in order to put your values into, like actual behavior. And so we spend time in the workshop also talking to employees about, if this, then what are some actions that you might take professionally to demonstrate some of your values, again, within the kind of construct of your company's values.
That's amazing. Amazing stuff that you're actually doing this.
It's
So,
it's sorry, I'll just really
no,
quickly
of
say that
course.
besides honestly, every time besides having the deck out there in the world, every time I walk out of one of these workshops, especially, and this conversation can begin with yourself at any age, but what is incredibly gratifying to me is when these workshops have younger folks in them, because I know that that life is going to be better
Yeah.
on so many different measures when these workshops, when this activity and this tool comes across the path of someone just earlier in life, because then it can influence, the rest of their lives. So when I walk out of these workshops after doing them, I'm like, oh my God, like it's an indescribable feeling. It's like the sun is shining like only on me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is my life's work. Like it's so powerful.
Yeah, I agree. That's so cool. How do, because obviously the line of work that a lot of the listeners will be in is, a lot of corporate work, so, and job seekers. Being a recruiter myself, I work with hiring managers and candidates all the time. How can candidates and hiring managers, I know you said you do this workshop to figure out if they're going to be aligned, but what can they do during their job search or hiring? Because especially what I've noticed is some companies have these values, but they haven't actually dug deep enough to live by them as a unit, and the people that they're hiring don't necessarily live by them either. So what can these two parties do to make sure that it is a successful partnership?
It's so funny that we're having this conversation today, because I just came off a project, a consulting project, excuse me, with an organization here in the US that was wanting to refresh the definition of their values. So not change their values, but just crisp up their definitions. And so I went through, like I do on these kinds of projects, I went through a pretty exhaustive process of stakeholder interviews to understand, like, all the way from, individual contributors to managers, to directors, to vice presidents, all the way to the leadership team, the senior leadership team, and the CEO. And by far, and this is a theme that was clear at Starbucks, it was clear at other organizations that I've worked in, and it was true of this process. By far, the most important thing is that in an organization, the people at the top, whatever that looks like, um, must be super clear on their values and must demonstrate them. It's not about saying it.
Yeah.
It's about, again, going back to that phrase that I used before, if this, then how can I tell? When leaders truly, genuinely, credibly know their values, and then the people around them can tell those values because of the way that they're acting, the choices they're making, the language they're using. Um, that is the single most influential at work. It's the single most influential thing that people are watching and feeling, because when that's true at the leadership level, then these values truly are put into action. There is this, as an example, and no company is perfect.
Yeah.
But just as an example, when I was working on a project to refresh the Starbucks global brand, one of the giant benefits of living here in the Pacific Northwest is that we have access to incredible companies. And so one of the places where we my team and I studied kind of best practices was at the time at Microsoft. And Microsoft had just gone through this big kind of values realignment. And we were literally sitting in the equivalent of their, cafeteria, like where employees gather to eat. And one of the things that became apparent is that they were on this learning journey to dig into their values, and literally they would spend a quarter, so like 3 months, on one value. They would bring in speakers, they would have listening sessions, they would have conversation sessions, there would be book clubs, there would be, like they just were educating themselves on what these values truly meant, and then imbuing it into every single so that they were made manifest. But it all falls apart if it's expected of employees, but leaders are doing something different.
Yeah.
It's like the most gigantic side eye of like, what do you mean? Excellence, I'm making that up, is one of our things we're most, care about or matters most to us. When I'm seeing this other kind of behavior or choices, or what do you mean integrity is the thing that we stand for, when I see, like, it's like the ultimate cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
when it's not demonstrated at the top.
That's so important. I'm so glad that we are speaking about this. The other thing I wanted to cover with you is that diversity and inclusion piece, because that can come into different forms, but I guess we could also have a diversity of values in some ways, and that can be embraced. Now, I mean, we touched this on a more personal level of, the top three and it doesn't align, but how can we embrace that diversity if there is going to be a clash here and there with some of the values
Sure.
within the corporate
Um,
environment?
no, totally. One of the things that I didn't have a chance to mention is that all of us, um, irrespective of what your personal values are, all of us are kind, and this is part of the workshop that I do. We touch on this concept. All of us are made up of kind of three buckets of values. There are universal values that have just, come down through, historical periods, and they sort of exist kind of irrespective of culture or different societies. And, these are things that you might think of as like love and beauty and
Yeah.
truth and, hopefully peace, but we're living in hard times on that front.
Yeah.
But the point being that there are these like kind of, if you put everyone in the world in a room, quote unquote, there are just a handful of things that by and large folks would say, yeah, that's kind of a universal value. Then there are what are called collective values, and these are sort of like um, core principles or ideas that a culture, a geography, a community might share. Um, and then there are the individual values that are, of course, shaped by our families of origin and our just, who we are at the individual level. So all of us are made up of all these. The hope is that within the work environment, there can be some common ground found. And this is the piece of, you know, if let's imagine a future state where everyone has used this tool
Yeah.
to get quite comfortable with themselves, um, and know themselves. So like the individual knows their values and are living in accord, in alignment with them, and then companies know their values and are living in accordance with them. If there's clarity of communication there, then logically, you know, if a company is clear about what they stand for and what matters to them and how they make decisions, presumably they would be attracting people over time. They would be attracting people who would sort of be, in cahoots with those values. And over time, people that aren't in cahoots with those values would presumably self-select out, or there would be
Yeah.
some sort of, exiting, always in service of getting closer and closer and closer. And so if you and I were colleagues in that organization, even though our values might not overlap, our personal values might not like completely overlap,
Yeah.
there would be this, in the values deck, you pulled out that card that said, matters to me.
Mm.
Usually there's some common ground found in that matters some to me,
Yeah.
where you and I can coexist in a company, even if personally, like in outside of work, we might not like have total values like overlap. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That's really interesting. I hadn't considered that middle column being, because I suppose the discarded column is one that you sort of forget about, but then the middle one is again one that you forget about, but now that you've incorporated into a more collective situation, it's an interesting concept. I know that you have to go very shortly, so I want to ask you a final question that I ask absolutely everyone that jumps on a podcast. But before I do, is there anything that maybe we haven't touched on that you would want to cover before we jump on that question?
You have done such a beautiful job of inquiry into the most salient parts of this conversation. No, I think we've touched on everything that is, the kind of tippy tops of all the important topics.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. No, of course. I just wanted to make sure that you felt that that was the case.
Thank you.
What has been, give me one decision that you have made in your career, or even in your life in this instance, but normally I say career, that has had a defining impact.
Um, it's such a good question, and my answer is that in my work, I have always um, sought out work for companies and brands that this idea of doing good by doing well is um, I'm sorry, doing well. Yeah, it's actually like a yin yang. This idea of I've always needed to work for companies and organizations that are concerned with more than just being financially successful. And to be honest with you, I have foregone higher salaries, higher titles, simply because I know that I must work. Now I'm a consultant, but like I said, I've spent, decades working in organizations, and I just could not work in a super vibrant job market here in Seattle, or I've worked in New York or Los Angeles or Portland, um, many, many, many jobs and many, many roles that paid more than what I made, that uh, had higher roles available than the roles that I had. But I need to do work that is more that contributes more to people and planet than just the thing that is being sold or the thing that is making the company financially successful. Um, I just feel this inherent, I guess, just like responsibility to contribute um, beyond like the salary I'm making and like the life that I'm personally able to live. And before I even knew it, before I even had words for it, that actually was a demonstration of what mattered most to me, meaning one of my values. It was about that. And that's why, like, when I first did that little piece of paper exercise, the precursor to this deck, I was like, oh my God. Like, again, it wasn't like, oh my God, who is this person? But just to see it, like just visually see it, I was like, oh, that's why I make the kinds of decisions that I make, both to go towards something or
Yeah.
to back away from something professionally. Is, oh, I do that, or even like a manager or a leader. That's why, like, I lean forward when I come
Mm.
across that kind of person, or I like back away when I come across this other kind of person. It's because these values, this value of contribution to something greater than myself has been like forever important to me.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Andrea,
Oh
for
my gosh.
coming here and spreading word about the work that you do. I'm now really considering that manifestation and the likes is real due to the fact that we are
Yes.
speaking.
Yes.
Sorry, I've
Yes.
got this
Thank
chair.
you.
No,
Thank
honestly,
you.
thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It's been amazing to have you on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, the richness of your inquiry, the work that you're doing, the fact that you are hosting these kinds of conversations speaks volumes about what matters to you. See, you don't even have to tell me what your values are. I can connect
You
the
can,
dots.
yeah.
Yes, I can tell. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I hope our paths cross again
Me
very
too.
soon.